From my point of view, spirituality is about disidentification with the body, with your culture, with your relationships. And facing the world every day without concepts, without understanding. You sidestep the use of the brain in as many situations as possible, so that when you're sitting in meditation, your mind may flow, but you don't feel anything connected to the mind at all. You're not your minds. Although I used to think I was the mind. But I'm not. After exploring my consciousness for over 50 years, I have absolutely no idea who I am, fundamentally. Why would you want to know who and what you are? That's a bunch of shit you shouldn't be involved in. It's a big waste of time and a waste of your own sense of well-being. You might as well get a flail and beat yourself over the back and hopefully get some feelings of sympathy from other people. But the mind is very limited. And yet, many of us, and I was totally submerged in mind. Now I know that mind is like a bullshit device. That tries to help you manipulate your way through daily life with the least pain possible to you. But in itself, the schism it creates in you is extremely painful. Get rid of your mind. A mind is something to waste. We're told not to waste our mind on trivia or wrong-headed projects. But I'm saying you're not really in the real world until the mind no longer plays any part in your daily existence. I can see my mind, my mental eye, and I can feel it to an extent. It's not me. All the chattering in my head is like an automatic recording that keeps playing in certain situations over and over again. But what you have to do is get free of your identification with mind. And I used to think that was the wrong thing to do. Mind was put there for a reason, I thought. So we should listen to it, have it guide us. But that makes us very dependent on the mind and what the mind decides is the case. There is a more radical solution to obtain peace on earth in yourself, and hopefully as a model for others. And that is to be aware of your mind. But not be of it anymore. Notice it's an object to you. You, who is before mind, are not the mind. You can look within endlessly. Until you get to places that are very difficult to talk about because there's nothing there. To the largest extent, you have to realize the mind is just like a thing that keeps turning over and over and working, just like my ceiling fan above me. It just does its thing. I can watch my mind do it, or I can forget about my mind and just rest in mindlessness. Now that is very hard to do. It takes quite a long time before you can really escape from the chaos that mind creates. The world is very complex, and we're always trying to simplify it so that we can work with simplistic concepts in order to do things in the world. But one thing you can do, and it takes time, is to find out what your consciousness is. Not the objects in consciousness. We'll take them for real as a point of departure. But we can learn to escape the mind altogether, which means we're not thinking when we're doing. We're responding directly from the heart, so to speak, and disallowing the intervention by the mind. Just let it all go. The whole world. Every problem in the world, every problem in your life. Just relax and drop down into your body. And what you feel first when you drop down and leave the mind behind is a new sense of peace. Mind is a good thing to waste. Unless your occupation is being a champion chess player or a lawyer who has to deal with concepts of law all the time. For most people, they're trapped by their mind, which is constantly judging what they're doing and what they should do. But when you get rid of the mind, and by that I mean you learn to sink down into yourself, into your body, into the protoplasm, into the consciousness which comes from the body, the existence of your body. And don't try to figure anything out about what's real, what's not real. Just forget about the mind. The mind is not going to help you get free. And now, in order to do this, we have to sort of ignore all the mind statements about who and what is, what we should be, what is morality. All such thinking has to go. And after it goes, rest in what's left, which is the experience of ourselves being alive, ourselves as consciousness. Kick the mind aside. Kick it to the curb. Following the mind may be good in certain occupations, but it's not very good when it comes to relationships or ultimate truths, or even finding rest in your life. You may face difficult immediate problems from the environment, but that's not like the theoretical problems we're all faced with. Just get mindless. Feel the mind drop down into your body. That's why you see photos of Zen students or Zen masters sitting peacefully with their arms, hands like this in your lap, cupped. and supposedly receiving the ever-flowing honey that's coming from your beingness that settles downwards into your cupped hands, and this leaves the mind away, because the mind feels located in the brain. It always does. So if you drop the mind, you can drop into your body and feel the body and its feelings of the environment much better than you've ever been able to do before. You can consider your mind a friendly enemy, friend to you, as long as you're not a slave to it, and you can just use it. Have it there till you need to use it. But the mind needs to be put in its place as something to be used to solve problems in the environment, but not to identify with. If you can identify with nothing, and get rid of all of your identifications if you can, and you find when you can do this, a big opening happens in your spirit. It's like a dark curtain has been taken away from your consciousness. Leaving you in emptiness, free of problems with your mind or the environment. You just learn how to sit and not be moved by anything. Of course, if you're sitting and you hear the flames from a fire in the room next door, I would definitely suggest listening to your mind and get the fuck out of there. But in everyday situations, losing the mind opens up your entire being. When the mind goes, in some ways it's like being asleep while you're awake. Asleep to the mind. Awake to your own body and to the environment around you. Yes, in certain ways, the environment around you is a deep illusion because it's created some secondary. But it's not essential to you, to your life, to being alive. You can rest in the peace of emptiness. You can meet people. You can love them or be angry with them. But it doesn't matter. Nothing sticks. You're free. You're free. There's no longer any quibbling about what is free and what you're free from. You can just feel it in yourself. You're totally open. Your heart is open. Your gut is open. Your ears, nose, eyes, they're all open. And yes, they do, in concert with the mind, create the world around us. But ideally, we limit thinking to problems in our life rather than trying to figure things out in a transcendental sort of way. When we move too far from the physical, we get caught up in vast isms like communism, Buddhism, Christianity, which is another ism, as well as the reality created by the minds of everybody else working in concert in society. To a large extent, our external world and our understanding of it, and our identification with it or disidentification with it, is the result of thousands of years of conditioning, which has resulted in the educational system we all were raised in. And I remember in my schooling as a pre-graduate high schooler, and it was very hard to get rid of the mind, because inside of us there was a hunger to know. And unless I fed that hunger by reading, listening to teachers and religious teachers, and rules and laws, which are incredibly complex, the more we're burdened by the mind and all of its rules and all of its understandings and all of its facts, and how it's conditioned how we experience the world and ourselves. Instead, leave the world behind, leave the mind behind, and watch how we interact with the world then. You don't have to watch it in the kind of probing way that we look for some sort of specks in a clean slate, but with a very relaxed body and mind. Watch the mind go through various periods during the day. When you meditate like that, either in everyday life or set aside time to meditate in silence. But try to always be aware of the mind until you get to the place where you no longer accept the mind as your identity or an identity. The mind is just like a radio, turn it off. And I used to judge it when I got into an empty mind. I used to think that that was irresponsible identification. That it was a diversion from real problems in the world to be solved by the mind, rather than seeing the mind is the creator, basically, of all problems. I know if there were a fire in the next room and I could begin to feel the warmth, that becomes a real problem. That wasn't created by the mind. But that's just an example. I think in everyday life, most of those of us who have been brought up in the United States or Europe has a rich history of ideas baked into them, into us. And these are not discussed in everyday affairs. Is this real or not? The reality is given. It's like we're on a blank chessboard. They were given 2 pawns and a bishop. We're told to go do something with it. That's how we approach the world. Doing something with it. Now, it's imperfect as it is now. Let's make it more harmonious or get rid of it altogether. But I tell you, and I promise you, if you can be in this world without the participation of the mind, you'll find deep peace. Because thinking makes you agitated. Think of problems you've struggled with for a long period of time in the past. You get all knotted up. The problem sort of cripples your whole beingness by creating these problems that you feel you have to resolve. The way to resolve them is to get rid of them altogether. Now, I know you'll raise questions at this point, just like I did. What am I going to do if I don't have a mind? And this becomes a little tricky because we're really not trying to get rid of the mind. We're trying to get rid of our identification with the mind and with the solutions that the mind thinks of. Realize those are only words, only concepts. And reality is found in existence without the mind being present and screwing things up. In my case, the mind is usually there somewhere, but it plays very little role in what I do or what I say. Some call it coming from your heart. That's one way to express it. But it's an oversimplification. We just try to get rid of all concepts we have about the world and about each other, even about ourselves, and just look anew. And one of the best ways to do that is sitting meditation. Like for 2 half-hour periods in the morning, with a short break of walking in between those 2 meditation periods. And learn eventually and slowly that my mind is not me. And in fact, even my whole body is not me. Understanding involves the mind. And there's a precision there in understanding that is based on logic, mathematics, philosophy, lots of other things. But we have to get rid of that identification and meet our environment undefended, unarmed, without the shield of mind to protect us from the world. And when we get rid of the mind, we can begin to rest in ourselves and respond to the situation in our daily lives with a deeper guide than the mind. It's like a divine intuition. We react to the conditions in the environment in a way that's very spontaneous. And it had nothing to do with the mind. It's a kind of knowledge that functions much more deeply than the mind or language. And our entrance into it, this understanding, is through silence and sitting meditation. and just feeling everything. You make a transition from thinking to feeling. I remember when I first went to Mount Baldy Zen Center, something like 50 years ago. I learned to replace thinking with a deep-seated peacefulness and emptiness. And it was difficult to get rid of just this peacefulness and emptiness. Because it did not include the mind. I hadn't yet learned that almost all human problems flow from the mind. Now, I don't mean that in terms of mass extinctions and starvations, but in everyday life of most of us. Yesterday it was 119 degrees here. It's been over 110 degrees for the 26 days in a row. We're setting a record for the month of July in terms of temperatures. Now this is an external environmental hazard that's not going to go away soon, if ever. This one is going to kill us eventually, the human race. So we have to change. Here again, the mind can be used to figure out how in our life we can act more congruently with the understanding and wisdom that the body without mind is presenting to us. In the deepest measure of things, anything that's expressed by language is wrong. There's no truth there. Words can never really express truth. Can only express relationship between different ideas we have about different parts of the world and ourselves, the relationships between them. But when the mind goes, those mental relationships also go. And without a mind to guide us in those relationships, we can act free of them. This allows us to do some really outrageous things from the perspective of a rational man in the West. Become a rogue human, I guess. Not following the rules because you don't even know what the rules are anymore. And instead, you're reacting from your own instantaneous assessment of what's going on. And in that sense, your response is innocent and usually very accurate compared to situations where you think and think and think and think, and they get increasingly complex until finally we think I have thought them all the way through and reached a conclusion. But a day passes and those conclusions don't seem so adequate anymore. The mind never rests unless we make it rest. When we learn how to be and function without the mind. I used to fence in college. And at first, fencing requires a great deal of thinking. How do you parry? How do you attack? And then practicing these, finding out which ways that you do it that work and what don't work. But after that learning phase, when you become a more expert fencer, it's no longer a problem. There are no problems anymore. Now you may say, yeah, but what about someone driving a car that gets in a wreck? Or what if you fall outside of an airplane? Or some other ridiculous points of view? What if is used by so many people as a shield from exposing themselves or exposing a point of view? But I can tell you, you can come to a place where the mind no longer troubles you. It doesn't force you to make decisions. You do those things spontaneously. And mostly by not responding. Go from a place where you see problems everywhere and need to solve those problems to a place where there don't seem to be any problems, just learning appropriate responses. And by appropriate, I mean responses that don't elicit too much negative reaction from your environment. Don't be foolish, is in other words. I used to go to Robert's Satsangs all the time for years. And when he'd say, "You're not the mind, you're not the body," they have nothing to do with you. It takes a while to absorb this and to discover it for yourself. Because everybody else around you thinks they are their minds and their bodies. What you are cannot be named or explained. What can be named and explained are concepts in your mind, which we may use to explain the external world. But they're still artificial creations, words, concepts. Words and concepts have nothing to do with who and what you are. They're something you use. So I don't identify with it. Identify with nothing. Drop your identifications. This is the hardest rule to follow. But it's a terrifically guiding concept of get to the place where you get to know what it's like to exist without the mind. And that's what meditation is for. To sit in emptiness, where the mind may move, but you pay it no attention because you've moved beyond the mind, or prior to the mind, really. You deepen your involvement in your body, which comes before your thinking mind. And you lose your identifications in every way. You just watch. And the secondary benefit of doing that is the peace you feel at not having to solve problems anymore. Robert used to say, drop the world. If there's something really important in the world that needs to be done, You don't have to be looking out for it every moment, guarding yourself. He says if it's important enough, they'll come and get you. The police will be knocking on your door or whatever. The less you need to depend on the mind for your livelihood, the better off you are. And the dumber you get, by that I mean, you don't engage with your mind about what you should be doing or where you should be doing it. And you approach the situation with an empty mind, empty of thoughts. Empty of thoughts you pay attention to, because the mind does a lot of things that I ignore now. I don't know what it's doing or why it's doing it. It's just noise to me. It's like a noise machine. And I don't see how in any way it informs my behaviors. I could easily pass day after day after day doing nothing and be supremely happy. Because what I feel is rest. Rest from all the problems of the world. All the existential problems posed by philosophers and religious people. All of that is just noise to me. I just want to get through the day without 1,000 things to do, to balance in my environment. You have to let go of all goals and instead to be without mind in your environment, where what happens is you just relax, and you relax, and you relax, so that every moment feels more or less like sitting in emptiness, as the mind is no longer needed or depended on. Mind is a wonderful thing to waste. Become dumb as a rock, as Sansanim used to say. Become dumb as a rock. That's where Zen comes in with all of its striking and patzes and hitting the floor with your hand or yelling something out loud and startling everybody. It's to get you out of your usual right mind. Now, what's difficult to understand is Ramana and Robert talk about your beingness. In transcendental terms, prior to consciousness. That your ultimate beingness is prior to consciousness. That means you can't be aware of it. Or else your consciousness expands more subtle areas within yourself and becomes more subtle, and the old concepts don't fit. In any event, it means your mind shuts up and doesn't interfere anymore. And instead, if there is a problem, you just rest in silence. Until a time comes when the solution, and I say that with guarded tongue, of whatever problems come up, arises spontaneously within you without the intervention of thought. It's learning how to live mindlessly and instead react with the entirety of your beingness in any situation. You react spontaneously without thought to every situation. And what does that give you but peace? You're no longer having to measure every one of your actions with your mind, figuring out what the consequences are going to be, or what's the right way or the moral way. And all that deliberation is wiped out of your consciousness. And you learn to just rest in silence until a solution spontaneously arises within you. And if none arises, make it so that waiting isn't painful. And you can do that just by practicing meditation and being still within yourself. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to learn how to do that. That's why I wrap up my teachings with such simplistic instructions as just relax. Let go of every problem. You're no longer students in school that have to pass tests at the end of the month. You don't have to measure up over the month, successes and failures. You pay them no heed at all. You don't have to worry about what is right to do, what is not right, because you're acting from no mind. And you feel peace. And in most situations, you won't need to react at all. You're at peace. Most situations don't get you anymore. They don't nail you. You don't feel aggrieved by them. You just act naturally and spontaneously to what's ever presented to you. And in a sense, you are dumb as a rock, because you're no longer questioning everything, trying to find new knowledge or new insight. And instead, you allow whatever you're acting or doing to arise spontaneously within you without a thought about how you should be or shouldn't be. You just act. And I think in most situations, the act in this circumstances is far more accurate and better suits whatever's going on in the environment or yourself around you. Your actions seem appropriate to the situation, as opposed to not reacting because you're dumb or overacting and doing something really stupid. Just imagine that all your problems in your head stop and you don't have them anymore. How relaxed would you feel? The example that comes to mind is Mad Magazine. And the character in there, I forget what his name is, saying, "What, me worry?" Instead, you're responding appropriately. And even that shouldn't be said. It's another add knowledge added on to you, and the less knowledge you have, the better. Simplify your life. Stop thinking about it and just being with it. Just be comfortable with yourself. That's so very difficult, isn't it? To let everything rest and to be free of it. You don't solve the problem, you just walk away from it. It doesn't bother you. You don't have to respond. Now, all of this is theoretical. But life isn't theoretical as it's lived. There are always decisions to be made. But we try to get away from even that. Instead of responding with the mind, with solutions, instead, we react from a position of being aware of the totality of our beingness. When we're silent and we look inside for a moment, we see an immense black emptiness in us and around us, which is our beingness without thought. Thought is something to be overcome. It constantly imprisons us. It's not that we strive to be stupid. We strive to be aware without thought. And in most cases, our responses will be more gentle and appropriate than otherwise they would be. Learning how to relax and sink into yourself is really restful. You're escaping from the mind and the tyranny of mind to becoming aware of your own beingness and sinking into that beingness to find your roots in a felt sort of way, not a thinking sort of way, but in a way you can feel. And you make this kind of path of doing this, transitioning to feeling from thinking, has all kinds of stages and things you go through. It's a great trip. It's a wonderful trip. I think it's the only trip worth taking on an individual basis. In a way, you're escaping for all of mankind, but none of them are directly going to benefit except when they notice how peaceful you are. And it gives them permission to also be peaceful. I've always had a bit of a problem with this point of view in the past, because I thought that meant having a strong understanding of what you're all about and what the world is all about. But it's not. It's putting the mind aside and reacting with your whole beingness in an innocent sort of way. Innocent in the sense it doesn't have a lot of thought involved in coming to the conclusion, because that just doesn't work. And you'll feel a difference in your life. You'll be able to feel your consciousness in your body. As well as things you've never felt before in your body. And you'll experience things that you don't have to explain with your mind. You won't have to use your mind to come to conclusions, make decisions. These things will be spontaneous, arise without thinking. Does anybody have any questions? In a sense, you have to escape from the world that you were before you heard the teachings of unworldliness. Because you've gotten to a point where you don't have a lot of existential decisions hovering over you to solve before you can be free. Instead, you are free. You react without mind. There's nothing for you to do or say anymore. It's not a job anymore. You just react in a way that seems appropriate, and you don't even have to think about that or judge that. You're not even aware of that. Just relax. Fall into your body. Enjoy your own beingness. Since I'm not the host, I can't do the things I used to do. My only option is to leave the meeting and just disappear. It gives me one option: leave meeting or cancel. Not the other ones I'd have of doing multiple things. So I'll leave you till Sunday, and hopefully it won't be 119 or 20 that day. I hear there may be an easing of this heat within a week. Take care of yourselves. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And there's a whole bunch of things here. Take care. I love you all. Don't blow away, Eddie. Take care.